and a huge warm welcome to my guest today, Veronica Roberts, who I'll be chatting to about home education, gameschooling and supporting parents. But first, let me tell you a little more about our guest. Veronica is an educational psychologist and parent coach based in Frome, Somerset. Graduating as an EP from the Institute of Education in 2009, she worked for many years in local authorities, specialising in autism and mental health. After having her own son in 2015 and realising she wanted to work more closely with parents, she shifted into her own independent practice, offering parent coaching alongside her educational psychology work. When COVID hit the world, her family were on the cusp of moving to New Zealand, but the borders closed 4 days before their flight, and so they were left stranded in the UK without a home. This was Veronica's first experience of home education, and after many failed attempts of trying to recreate a classroom, she turned to gameschooling, something she describes as a total game changer in terms of supporting her son's enthusiasm and engagement with learning. She and her family finally emigrated to New Zealand in June 2021, where she worked with Te Kahu Toi, the intensive wraparound service, a service set up to support the most vulnerable children in the country and their families. It was during this time that she began to appreciate the intersection of neurodiversity and educational trauma, both in her professional work but also within her own family, as her son's sensory needs meant his re-entry into school had led to a rapid decline in his behaviour and well-being, and ultimately sensory overload and burnout. Veronica has recently spoken in her local community about the journey she went on as a parent, re-entering home education as a last resort and supporting her son back from burnout to well-being. She is keen to raise awareness and understanding on the issue within schools, as well as support parents in similar situations. She is particularly interested in the de-schooling process for families where home education has felt like a forced choice or a last resort, and is in the process of writing a book to support parents on this journey. What a fantastic story to start with, and so many things that I just can't wait to unpick, and things that I think are really going to resonate with a lot of people that listen to this. So I am very, very happy to welcome Veronica to the podcast. How are you doing?
Thank you so much for having me, Lucy. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
I have so many questions. It's amazing all of the work that you've done, and there are so many elements to this that I can resonate with. So many elements that I speak with lots of families, that I hear these stories over and over. This whole kind of last resort when it comes to home education, it's so prevalent at the moment. So Let's start at the beginning, because there are so many questions, but let's go right back to what first drew you to educational psychology and what kind of got you passionate about being in that field.
So I actually ended up being interested in psychology completely by fluke chance. So I enrolled in my sixth form college. I was meant to be on a textile design technology course, and I got assigned.
Okay.
Yeah, I know, it's completely random. And I got assigned woodwork instead. Right. And so I was pretty miserable because I had no idea what to do. And my friend had joined the psychology class and was really enjoying it. So she's like, why don't you come and try that? And the rest, as they say, is history, because I just loved it. It was just totally my bag. And in particular, we did one module which was called the cognitive psychology module, and that was all about kind of how the brain learns, like how people learn, how we remember things, what helps us do that, which was amazing because it felt like it was actually teaching me how to revise for my A-levels.
Oh, really?
So I actually applied loads of it to my revision techniques and stuff. So I got really enthusiastic about that. And I also loved working with children. So I'd worked as a nanny and in a nursery. And so then I found out that educational psychology combined both of those things.
Yeah.
It was tailor-made for me. And I suppose, the thing that keeps me passionate about it is the fact that learning is just a lifelong process, and that we're always learning more about learning, right? So we've got all this neuropsychology coming online and all this information about how we learn. And so that's kind of just kept me interested. But also, I think psychology as a field is really flexible in that you can become passionate about an area and really pursue it and follow it, and tailor it to your life circumstances, which is definitely what I'm doing now.
Perfect.
Yeah.
What kind of things kind of entails being an educational psychologist? Like, what does a typical day look like? Because this was an area that I was really, really interested in many, many years ago. But I'm a really emotive person, and I hold people's emotions really easily. And I was worried that I wouldn't be able to kind of leave the emotions at the door, and that I would really take on all of the children's trauma, and hold it in my body, because I'm very much like that as a person. So it was something that I so desperately wanted to do. And I always said if I was ever going to do another degree, I would go down that route. I was really weighing up whether to do it, but I don't know if I could detach that trauma from my own. Does it have a lot of that element in it?
Yeah, it does. And I think, I mean, so yeah, gosh, there's lots of different elements to that question, really. I mean, because I had similar worries. So initially, I was thinking of becoming a clinical psychologist for
Right.
children, and I actually did a clinical internship in America, and that was one of the things that shifted me across to educational for exactly the reason you're talking about, was that I recognized that, I'm quite a deep empath, and I couldn't hold it all and hold myself, like,
Mm,
with a full-time caseload. And so educational psychology felt like safer for me, maybe. Like,
yeah.
uh, and because and in terms of the role, the most well, a lot of educational psychologists are working in local authorities, and in that role, you're primarily working with a batch of schools. So you'll have like an allocation of schools, and you become their touch point. And so when they're concerned about a child, they'll do a referral to you. And then how you support them will vary on how much time you've got allocated to that school,
Mm,
and also what they need. And so a lot of that was going in, doing observations in the classroom or on the playground, and then consulting with the class teacher and the parents to kind of come up with a plan, an action plan, and to support their thinking around what was lying underneath some of the behaviours that we might be seeing for that child. And yeah, so and then, but the one of the things that's happening, particularly now with all the cuts to funding, is that educational psychologists get more and more pushed towards doing education and healthcare plans assessments
right.
alone, really, like that, because that's the statutory work, that's the work that's legally required by a local authority to be provided. That becomes the focus. And obviously we have got a huge demand for EHCPs in this country at the moment. And so unfortunately, that means that some of the other work can get sidelined because that has to be prioritized. And so what you find is that actually there are quite a few educational psychologists moving across into private practice because they don't necessarily want to be on that treadmill.
Yeah.
And of course, the downside of that is then the local authorities have less EPs, so there's less workforce to do the EHCPs.
Yeah.
So it is really challenging. But yeah, so I mean, one of the reasons I moved from local authority practice to independent practice was that, my son was born, and I realised, because my husband was working away a lot in London at the time, I realised in terms of us having a work-life balance and, just family life being
Yeah.
feasible, that wasn't really going to work. And when I moved from an outer London borough to a more rural borough to do my work, I went from having 5 schools to 26.
Whoa.
Yeah. And,
That's huge.
it was a huge leap. And one of the schools had 12 hours of support for the year. So then what you can actually feasibly, meaningfully do is extremely limited. And I found that really, really difficult because I'm quite a thorough person. I'm quite detail orientated. I love to, really kind of dig deep. And that was just not possible in that context. And so I felt like I needed to make that shift just for my own conscience and enjoyment of the work, because I love the work, so I wanted to do it in the best way I knew how, and that just wasn't really feasible in the local authority structure. And that was, obviously 10 years ago now. So it's even more challenging now, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're so right when you say, obviously, you've got to think about why you're in it. What is the passion in it for you to do the job? And if that's not being fulfilled in that role, then the need is to look elsewhere. But then that leaves that gap in the local authority, which I think, educational psychologists are so valuable. And I imagine that input from an EP into an EHCP process is so valuable. So to lose that element is really tough because it puts...
But they're not allowed to do it without the EdPsych input. That is crucial. It's a legal requirement. So, so if there aren't enough EPs, then they can't do it.
Is that contributing to why it's taking so long to do them then, do you think?
I think that's part of it, potentially. But it is, because when I did my training, there was actually a bit of a crisis in educational psychology in that they had an aging population of EPs that were all coming up for retirement, and there weren't enough new ones coming through.
Oh, wow.
But like I say, that was, quite a while ago now. So I think there is potentially that kind of workforce issue, but also the demand for EHCPs has dramatically increased. And that has occurred. My belief is that that's occurred because of the drop in funding for schools for them to be able to manage without applying for additional funds.
Right.
They haven't got much slush to play with to put things in place before requesting additional support. And so they're having to put more referrals in. And parents, I think, have also become more aware that they can put in their own request. And COVID, I think, also highlighted, parents got to see how their kids were engaging with the work and were concerned. I think that also led to quite an increase as well.
There's not just one answer, is there? I think it's been a culmination. Many things. Yeah, exactly. So you've specialised within your work in autism and mental health. What have been some of the most important lessons that you've learned from that sort of work?
Yeah, so I was thinking about that, because I think my work with autistic children really highlighted the importance of seeing the world through the child's eyes. So obviously that's not specific to autistic children or neurodiverse children by any means, but my work there really enhanced that message for me.
Yeah.
And I think, I can remember doing this observation, and it was a specialist hub for neurodiverse kids. And I'd been asked to come in to support them with a boy who was nonverbal and wasn't interacting with anybody. And it was their break time when I got there, and I could see he had this toy train that he was running around the edge of the playground. So, and he's zooming around, and they were like, oh yeah, he does that every day. That's his thing that he does. And so I joined him in it. So I grabbed a train as well, and I started kind of scooting it along beside him. And I was, to be fair, I was knackered within like a few minutes. um, but I wanted to kind of really experience what he was experiencing, so I could get a feel for what he was getting from that activity. But when I got considerably out of puff, I sat down next to one of the TAs, and there was this moment where he just stopped, looked at me, and he grabbed the train that I'd been playing with, walked up to me, made eye contact, and gave me the train.
Oh.
And it was just this moment of like, wow. And it was the first time he'd initiated an interaction. And I think at the time of my training, because that was quite early on in my career, like, at the time it was felt that kids with autism were in their own world, and they quite liked it in their own world, and they didn't necessarily want to come out of that. And for me, that really showed that actually it wasn't about them not wanting connection. It was just that we had to find a way to join them in their world first.
Yeah.
And that connection needed to feel safe to them and relevant and engaging for them. And so that was kind of one of the key things. And I think, like I say, that my early training kind of was focused on getting neurodiverse children to do what we wanted them to do, what society and what schools wanted them to do in the way that we wanted them to do it, which was like the neurotypical way, right? So there were rules to follow, and they were taught scripts and ways, this is what friendship is, and this is what a good friend does, and all, and it was, and now I look back on that and I feel kind of a bit like, uncomfortable, really uncomfortable about it, because actually, my focus was always on trying to understand their way of seeing and experiencing the world. And I think, the world is shifting to kind of recognizing that that's what we need to do, and so that we can put adaptations in place that support them to kind of flourish and unfurl themselves, in a context that feels safe. So it's much more around solving that dual empathy problem. It's, the focus was initially very much on getting autistic kids to understand the neurotypical way. And now I think we're growing in that understanding that actually is about understanding the neurodiverse world as well.
Absolutely.
It's both.
Yeah.
And it's about helping them develop the skills that they want to develop, because it is motivating for them. It is what they want. It's going to make their life better for them rather than it's what we want them to do. So that was kind of one of the key lessons that stuck with me from my work in autism. In terms of like the mental health, so in my specialist role, I worked in a tier 2 CAM service, and as part of that I worked with a lot of specialist social and emotional behavioural difficulty provisions. But the specialist provisions I was working with were very behaviourist in their approach. So, the rewards and consequences, rewards for good behaviour, consequences for not doing what you were meant to be doing. And again, that is that focus on getting the children to do what the adults wanted.
Yeah.
Compliance and obedience. And actually, when you step back from that, the children that were attending those provisions were often in contexts where that was actually a really dangerous precedent to set, to try and get them to just do what adults told them to do, because actually, they were vulnerable to gang recruitment and, stuff like that. So actually trying to to instill them in that had a lot of ramifications for their future. And, it's a lot of kind of, firm, consistent boundaries and zero tolerance policies and things like that. And for me, zero tolerance policies make zero sense, because if you are trying to support a child's tolerance like of the world and other people and provocation and things like that, that needs to be modeled.
Yeah.
Zero tolerance policies absolutely do not model that at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so working with those provisions, actually I felt the provisions that were most effective were the nurture groups.
Okay.
So nurture groups are set up to be nurturing. They're providing, they'd often have breakfast together. They'd make toast, and the children would make the toast themselves, but they'd be supported to do it. And it was very much around meeting those basic needs mm-hmm. for the children so that they could feel safe. And in those situations, actually, you found that the kids very naturally started showing more regulated behaviour.
Yeah.
Because they felt safe. And actually, I really like Ross Green's saying of like, kids will do well if they can. And actually, our task is to provide a context in which it feels safe for them to be vulnerable, because learning is a really vulnerable process. It involves taking risks, putting your head above the parapet, and making mistakes. If you don't feel safe, how can you do that? So it really emphasized for me the importance of context, really, for supporting children's development.
It's so true what you're saying about that need to feel safe. We know that children have to feel safe in their environment for them to be able to learn. If you are in that state of fight or flight, your brain is not going to be ready to receive information and to learn from it. So that feeling of safety and being able to be vulnerable in that environment is so important. So the sound of that nurture group sounds amazing, and I know quite a few alternate provisions that do things like making breakfast together and things like that, because of the importance placed on learning those key skills, but within that safe environment with adults around you that can model and support. And actually, I guess being in those, I don't want to say mundane tasks, but kind of everyday tasks also gives that platform to talk about things that are not so everyday, and because it's wrapped up within those general things. It's like when you're in your car and you're driving and your children use that moment to start a conversation on something that they might feel a bit vulnerable about, because your focus is on driving, it's not looking directly at them. And I guess it's a similar sort of thing, isn't it? If you're doing those sort of supportive tasks, but it could give that platform as well.
It's about the relationship between that adult and the child. And I think that is one of the really sad things about the current situation in schools, I think, is that the pressure is so high on teachers and on the kids that actually there isn't time or space to dedicate to just building the relationship. And I think, again, those nurture groups really emphasized that it was about having a kind and caring relationship with that child, where they knew that you cared, because you were showing it through those interactions, through those tasks of meeting their basic needs, and emotional needs. So
Yeah, and I wonder as well, I think it's more challenging for that relationship building to happen in secondary school because of the sheer amount of moving around between lessons, having different teachers for different subjects, which, I completely understand the rationale behind that, and having subject specific expertise within that. But in primary school, when you generally have one teacher for the whole day, you hear a lot more about that relationship being stronger within that primary setting than it is in secondary.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, I kind of compare it to, primary schools. It's like when you're living in a village and everyone knows your name. And then secondary school is like living in a city where nobody knows what on earth you're doing and or really cares. Like they're just getting on with their own stuff, right?
Yeah.
And, that's possibly a bit harsh on secondary teachers because actually I know a lot of secondary teachers who really do care. But again,
Yeah, of
like
course.
it's that constant flow. And they've got 1 hour and they've got a certain amount of curriculum they've got to get through because otherwise then they're behind and there's catching up to and all of that kind of stuff. It's really, really difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And that jump from primary to secondary, that transition from year six to it's huge. It's really, really huge. And it has a huge impact on our young people. And that was as a parent myself, I really noticed that in my daughter, that transition from year six into year seven. She found year seven incredibly challenging, making that adaptation into there. And then when she went into year eight, that's when COVID hit. That's when we realized how much she was thriving outside of the mainstream system, and she went back briefly after COVID, but then was deregistered and home educated from year nine onwards. But that transition is really, really hard, and especially for those children that were doing it in and around that COVID time to add into the mix. So speaking of COVID, you had quite a challenging time. That was my link through. You had quite a challenging time through COVID. Moving to New Zealand, it not happening. Tell us all about it.
Oh God. Yeah, I mean, that was crazy times because we went from having 2 weeks with our son in school to pack up the house to having like 5 days with him in the house whilst we were packing up around him, and we didn't have any kind of support with the move because everyone was being told to kind of keep distance and stuff. So it was hard, and we ended up literally crossing the bridge into Wales as Boris Johnson was doing his lockdown from midnight to night.
No.
And so if we'd left it even a few hours later, we would have been, I don't know, stranded in our empty house with no furniture and nothing, like not even cutlery. So thank God we actually made it over the bridge. But yeah, so and the thing was we'd been planning to homeschool, but whilst traveling.
Okay.
So our mindset had been, well, our son's going to be 5, like we can take him out of school for a year to go on this amazing trip sailing around the Pacific, and he will be learning so much from that experience that what he misses at school will easily be caught up. Is that kind of match up thing, isn't it? But yeah, we weren't worried about it because we were just like, life will be the learning in that situation. And then of course COVID happens, and it's like, okay, so the portion of the world we can see is there like a square mile of Wales, which Wales is beautiful, but a square mile, there's only so much you can do. So it was complete opposite of what we'd anticipated for our first venture into homeschooling or home education. And I think because it hadn't gone according to plan, I felt like this real pressure to recreate school at home, because I was like, well, we're not doing that. So actually I just need to stick to what, he would have been doing in school. And that did not go well. That did not go well at all.
All best laid plans.
Yeah, exactly. So I started, initially I'd kind of tried to set it up at the table and like, oh, we're going to do this, and no. And so then I was like, right, okay, get creative, start, trying to make this fun. And there were, some fairly good moments. Like we made a aeroplane out of a old kitchen roll holder, and actually made the propeller turn around with string and stuff. And we made
Oh,
a Lego sort of carriage that went down on a string from the top of the garden because it was on a hill, like,
right.
and he had to choose letters that would make words with the letters at the bottom and stuff, you know. So we did get creative, and that was a bit more successful, but still not great because he could sense there was an agenda, right?
Right.
And he really reacted to that. And
You're trying to make me learn.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And he was allergic to that, I think is probably the best way to describe it. And so actually the thing that saved us was actually my mum bought us a board game called Queen Domino. I don't know if you've come across it.
No,
It's
I
quite a good
haven't.
game. Yeah, and he loved it. He absolutely loved it. And through that game, I kind of was realizing, right, he's learning strategy, he's learning maths like times tables, and also kind of visual spatial arrangement because you've got to arrange the dominoes in particular patterns and stuff. And so I was like, hang on, this is maybe the way forward. And so I came across this woman in America. She was a school psychologist. Oh yeah, that's it, Kate Curley.
Right.
And she's got a website called My Little Poppies. So she was an American school psychologist and a home editing mum, and she basically had invented this term called gameschooling,
Right.
where you used board games and card games to support your kids' learning, to support home education.
Right.
And it wasn't, you know, there's lots of games that are basically, you know, teaching curriculum through the game, right? And it's not those. It's just your normal board games that are actually really appealing and fun intrinsically. And the learning comes kind of just through the playing. Like you end up reading the rules, or you're reading the cards, or you know, you're working out the probability of something. And that was the way forward for us, really. I realized how much he was learning just through the play, and it was so well hidden he didn't notice.
So you're chuckling in the corner because you've got one over on him.
Yeah.
See, when you said game schooling, I immediately thought online gaming. And I thought that's what you meant by game schooling, because there are lots and lots of kind of online gamification, you know, things that children can do, which are, you know, fantastic, and technology definitely has a place, in my opinion. So when you said game schooling, that's kind of what I thought. I didn't think about, you know, the traditional types of games, but now you've explained it. It makes perfect sense. There are, I imagine, endless opportunities within games to teach the curriculum.
And in a way, like the more kind of well, for him, for my son specifically, like if the games were kind of more grown up, then that actually motivated him more. Like so for example, there's a game called Munchkin. I don't know if you've heard of that. It sounds really
No.
cutesy. It sounds really cutesy, but it is not. It's about working your way through a dungeon, and you've got to fight these monsters, and it's very you know, it's got a lot of tongue-in-cheek humor in there, and the cards have got this tiny font base, and you know, they're not what you would think, oh, this will help a young kid learn to read, but at all. But because he was so motivated to learn the game, because it was like a slightly naughty adult game, like, you know,
Yeah.
then actually he was really starting to try to read the cards, and that was our way in. So, you know, it's not what a dyslexia specialist would suggest to support, but because he was engaged with it, that was what, drew him in really.
And I
And
think
that
that's
was things that helped him learn to read. So
yeah. And I think that's key, isn't it? It's feeling confident and supported as a parent to look for the best way that your child learns. And I think for me, that's the beauty with things like home education and flexi schooling and the different options that you have as parents, because I think nobody knows your child as well as you do, and nobody can really see those nuances from your child as they're learning as the parent can. So I think if you are in a space where you feel supported and able to really indulge in that, there can be some really magical moments of finding out about your child and what they're like and how they learn. And it's really eye-opening, I think. And not everybody gets the opportunity to do that. And I think it's beautiful that you've been able to have that time and discover something so unique, like the game schooling way. And we're hearing lots and lots of terminology now, homeschooling, road schooling, world schooling, game schooling. Like, there's loads and loads of terms that we're hearing now. But I think that just goes to show that we're getting better and better at identifying the huge range of ways that we as humans learn. It's not just about children. You and I, we learn in so many different ways, and I'm still learning how I learn best for specific topics. It's a lifelong thing.
and I think the main thing is it's kind of that motivation to learn the thing that you're learning.
Yeah.
And I think that is unfortunately what the curriculum doesn't allow,
Yeah.
because the curriculum has got a set structure, and a set kind of amount of information and type of information that you're meant to be learning, regardless of whether it interests you or not, or is actually going to be of any use to you. And that's not how we're designed to learn best. Like, we learn because we need to solve a problem that we're facing, or because we find it absolutely fascinating and we want to find out more.
Yeah.
And then we can apply those strategies that work for us, that help us kind of actually absorb that information. But ultimately, the thing that drives you to apply those strategies is that you want to do it in the first place. And if you don't want to, which is unfortunately the case for a lot of the kids sitting in that classroom, then you're going to be pushing boulders up hills, basically.
Mm-hmm. The amount of times I've heard stories from families and from children as well. I've spoken to lots and lots of children who have moved from being in mainstream school to being home educated. And the amount of times I hear stories like, when I was at school, I really hated maths and now I love it.
Yeah,
because they've found another way to learn those mathematical skills, but within a context that interests them, that follows like an interests-led way of learning. Exactly that. And I don't know what the answer is. It's all well and good us saying, this is what schools need to be doing, and there's lots of evidence demonstrating that things need to be different. However, it's really hard for teachers to be able to do certain things. Schools are hugely overpopulated, so being able to practically do some of the things that need to happen, and funding and policy and all of these things make it really difficult to do that. And I think for me, that's why I'm really passionate about, actually, we need a range. Schools are great for a lot of children, so absolutely, there's a place for them. But for the children that it's not working for, let's embrace that other way of learning, and let's give that equal weighting and equal support. And, let's not ostracize everyone who chooses something other than that, and actually let everyone have a choice in it. And then maybe that would give the opportunity to those bigger schools to be able to adopt some of the things that they want to be able to reach more children in that way.
I totally agree. I think we do need more variety because there is no one size fits all. Unfortunately, I think we're going the opposite direction politically at the moment because with the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill, that's actually narrowing the
Yeah,
options. Like it's making it much more difficult for those alternative education providers that are supporting home educating groups, for example, to be run. You know,
yeah,
it's narrowing their time span. It's making it much more kind of, much more difficult. Plus the VAT on schools fees. So then independent schools are being, a lot of them are closing down, right? Because they can't, the families can't afford the fees anymore because a lot of those families were not affluent families, but they were really cutting back in order to send their kid to a provision that better met their needs.
yeah.
And so I think, I mean, I'm really hoping because it's going back to the House of Commons soon, isn't it? The white paper. So I'm hoping that there will be amendments made to recognise the fact that there's a value in that diversity of options. Because otherwise, I think it's going to get worse.
Yeah, I hear where you're coming from. Absolutely. I want to just touch upon you spoke before about the links between neurodiversity and educational trauma. For listeners who might be new to this kind of concept, how would you explain that?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I suppose so educational trauma is a bit of a interesting topic in that you can't find much about it.
Really?
In that you look up educational trauma and what you get back is trauma-informed schools.
Right.
And that's very different in my mind, because actually trauma-informed schools is kind of assuming that kids are coming to school with trauma. And therefore they have to kind of adapt and apply an approach in order to support those children with their trauma. It's not recognizing the fact that just the way schools are set up can be traumatic for some children. And that is what educational trauma is that, the process of attending a school and having to kind of fit in that system that is overwhelming for them and causes huge amounts of stress, creates a trauma response in them. And that does not seem. There's one book that I found,
Really?
and it's about 80 quid. So I haven't bought it yet. So it's quite strange, and because, like you say, actually, anecdotally, we are hearing about it a lot.
Yeah.
And it is recognised kind of within educational professionals, and I think schools are beginning to kind of recognise that school can be a traumatic space for some kids, but because there's not necessarily any research around it, is then, well, what do we do about it?
Yeah.
And so in terms of kind of that intersection between neurodiversity and educational trauma, neurodiverse kids have a lot of stresses on them that other children won't experience. Like, so those sensory overload experiences, for example, the corridors, the fire alarms, just the school bells in between lessons, the crowds talking. I mean, my son will, we've got three schools at the end of our road. So in the morning, we have like this tidal wave of people walking past our house. And my son will make sure he's at the other side of the house so he doesn't have to deal with that noise. And that's before they even get in.
Yeah.
So, and I think neurodiverse kids are also more vulnerable to traumatic experiences within the school context. So bullying, for example, because of their social communication needs and things, that they can be more vulnerable to that. And that will obviously cause a greater amount of stress. And the social anxiety. When you're in school for 6 hours and stuff, you're surrounded in that social environment the whole time. You've got no get out. And actually, that social anxiety is legitimate, because there is the dual empathy problem in that schools are expecting a neurotypical performance. And so you're not meeting the expectations on repeat. So that all of that kind of factors in, and also, difficulties with emotional regulation, which, is a skill that kind of can come online later for neurodiverse kids. And that can be scary, to know that you could suddenly lose it in front of people and you've got no control over that. And then the social ramifications of that as well. So there were some researchers who came up with this kind of term, like a traumatic conditioning process. So it's almost like the neurodiversity is creating a susceptibility to trauma.
Right. Okay.
Because of how you're processing the world and how you are experiencing the world. Those everyday experiences can be traumatic. Plus, you are more vulnerable to trauma happening to you. And so that was kind of what I experienced through my work in Te Kaho Toi, was, a lot of the children I was working with were highly traumatized by education as well as family situations. And that had been really escalated by their neurodiversity as well, because their way of processing what had happened to them was very different. And so a lot of the support didn't work for them. So we had to think of really carefully tailored approaches, and I think outside of the box a lot.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And again, like, really resonates with our personal story, in that when my daughter was at school, she's very highly academic. She loves learning. She likes to learn fast. She's like, right, what next? What next? What can I do now? So because academically she was performing, the school were like, she's fine. She's fine. And I was like, she's not fine. And she has social anxiety. She has sensory processing challenges. She really struggles with her emotional regulation. So all of those elements of school life were really, really tough for her, really tough, especially the social side of things. And she's autistic and has ADHD. And so she has lots and lots going on at any one time in her brain. So she found school really, really challenging from that perspective. The learning, not at all. It was everything else around it. So that acknowledgement of what you were saying, of that element of it, really rung true, because that's where we struggled as a family. And it was removing her from that environment really showed us her learning potential, because all of that external worry, challenge, trauma was taken away, and she could focus on, right, what am I interested in, and really get into it. And I think, sadly, I think that's a really common story for a lot of children in our schools. I think, so trauma is quite it's a very strong word. So when you say somebody has a trauma response to something, like, what does that mean? What physically and kind of mentally or emotionally, what happens if you're having a trauma response to something?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. So for me, I think it's that fight, flight or freeze response, but chronic.
Right.
For an extended period of time. So because we all have like that we can all experience stress. Yeah. But it's when that stress is prolonged that, we start to feel the really negative effects. And I think that is what a lot of these kids are experiencing in school, is that they're having expectations placed upon them that they cannot meet through no fault their own, and they're constantly trying but failing, and it feels out of their control, and so then it's overwhelming. But it's also that message of, but it's you that's the problem because everybody else is fine.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
And, you know, I mean, similar to your daughter, our son, his learning actually regressed when he went back into school. Like they were saying he couldn't cope with the year 3 curriculum and things, you know, age expectations, whereas actually, you know, we'd been doing simultaneous equations with him. So we were just like, yeah, he can definitely add 10 plus 15. Like,
Yeah.
and they wouldn't believe us. Like they just couldn't believe us from what they were seeing in that context. So yeah, that trauma response is that you can't necessarily access what you're actually capable of.
Right.
Then you've got that extra kind of frustration and disconnection from yourself. So it's just very disorientating. And you think about it, as an adult, if you were working in a context or company where every day you went in and inside you felt like you were screaming in agony, like because of the sensory overwhelm and the social overload, and you know, you would quit. You would find a different job in a different context that was more suitable to you. But children aren't given that option. So they're trapped. And it's like that, you know, there's that horrible experiment done years ago around the learned self-helplessness where they had the electric floors. Did you hear about this?
No.
Yeah, it was a horrible experiment. Like, you know, it was in the dark days of psychology where, you know, they were doing animal experiments and things, and they had dogs in a cage, and they would have half of the cage electrified and half of it not. And then, you know, they'd zap it and the dog would move. But if it would learn to move, right, to the non-electrified part, but then they electrified the whole floor, and they basically found that the dog started exhibiting signs of depression because there was no escape from the pain. There was no escape from that situation. And I really feel that is kind of how a lot of the kids who are experiencing mental health difficulties around school attendance feel, actually, because they feel quite helpless. They've got no escape route. There's no control or autonomy over their situation. And so that, you know, what options are left to them is to kind of shut down.
Yeah.
Really.
It's awful. See, this is why I couldn't do this job. Already, I just want to cry. It's awful though, isn't it? When you start kind of picking apart what these children are potentially feeling and what that experience must feel like for them, it's just devastating. I mean, what would you say that schools can do to be more aware and responsive to educational trauma?
Empathy.
Yeah.
Experiencing the world from the child's point of view. And as we've kind of already talked about, that takes capacity.
Yeah.
You know, but, you know, I think there's a lot of videos out there now on YouTube that really help you get a kind of lived experience of what it's like to have autism, like, and all sensory needs, you know, in particular, like, and to experience the internal workings of an ADHD brain. I was watching one the other day where a woman was saying, so this is what's happening in my head all the time, and it was just like 10 different conversations happening, and, you know, different bits of music, and then supermarket sounds, and like, like that's what it's like in my head all the time. And I think, you know, that's really easy to forget if you are neurotypical and not experiencing that, and you've just got a kid who keeps shouting out in the class or getting out of their seat, or, you know, and you just need to get through the curriculum it's really easy to get frustrated with that and forget what they're experiencing, and where those behaviors are actually coming from.
Yeah.
So, I mean, one of the things I used to do when I was an outreach worker, like we would do a tour of the school with the neurodivergent pupil.
Okay.
So I'd like have a map, and we would color code the map for points where they felt safe, points where they didn't, that were absolutely like I would never go there kind of thing. And that's something that teachers or TAs can easily do. And it just will, through that process, you get an understanding of how they're experiencing the school environment, and what they find stressful, and what they find soothing, and where they go, like what feels safe to them, because then you've got clues as to what you can do to adapt. And the other thing is that obviously, like, my son is the classic at this. He'll agree with you just to get out of the conversation. Whatever response ends the conversation as quickly as possible will be the response he will give at certain times. And so actually, if you're asking information from them, it's best to kind of reduce the social demand as much as possible.
Yeah.
And to reduce the risk for them as well. And so sometimes for some children it can be helpful to kind of like, if you've got a scenario, so taking my son as an example, he was really struggling to have showers when we were living in New Zealand, and really, really resistant, and like oh my God, the battles. And I was like, I don't think I can do this anymore. And so I just kind of racked my brain for all of the possible things I could think of that might be getting in the way of him being able to do that. And I listed them down kind of one side, and I put it in a table, and I had like a 5-point scale, and one was, yeah, I know.
Wow.
One was definitely not true, and 5 was definitely true. And all he had to do then was tick like which ones applied and which ones didn't.
Okay.
There was no conversation. But from his responses, I could then go, oh, okay, you hate the towels. Okay, we can get a different type of towel. We can get a microfiber towel, no problem. And so it was just a kind of way of getting a lot of information in a way that wasn't stressful for him, that then helped me think of ways to adapt with him to make it possible. Because he did need to shower.
When you said that, I was just thinking so many parents of neurodivergent children will be nodding along with you. Yeah. It's such a common thing, isn't it?
Oh God. And actually one of the things, like now we're not living on a boat, is that he doesn't have showers at all. He has baths, because actually the pressure of the water of the shower is a sensory thing for him.
Yeah, right.
And so baths are easier.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, when we were sailing around, we just used to like lather him up and then shove him in the sea.
I was going to say that. Like, pop him overboard.
Swim now, like that's it. You're done.
Love it. Oh God, it is a struggle though, isn't it? And I think one of the brilliant things is when you are able to, like you have done there, is think outside the box, right? I have a challenge. How can I get the information from this young person to then fix the issue without making it a big stressful situation? And it does require sometimes thinking outside the box and thinking of these alternative ways. And that's really hard as a parent, because if you're not experienced in thinking that way, if you've not ever had to do that, then that can be a challenge in itself. So I think it's wonderful when, things like this, having a podcast episode or having those communities with parents or online groups and things like that, to be able to ask for help, I think is really valuable to parents, because parenting's hard, and there's no book, There's no answers
So
to
there's
all.
several books, but they're
Well,
all kind of, do different things, and then you try them and it doesn't work. But
yep.
it's quite nuanced. Every child and family and parent is different, and they have their own trigger points, and
Yeah.
so yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about the parent coaching work I do, is that you can have like some ideas and strategies, but actually you get to work with the real, like, the nuances of that family and really tailor it to them and their unique situation. And also a lot of it is that emotional response that we have as parents in those situations, and what gets triggered in us, and
Mm,
working through that, so that actually that becomes less of an issue. You're not getting so heightened yourself by some of
yeah.
those behaviors. You can kind of respond a bit more neutrally,
Mm.
because I mean, there's nobody who can push your buttons quite like your own child. Like, some days it is like that is what they were brought to this earth to do.
Yes,
Like,
especially when they're really similar to you and you look at them and you go, oh, that's me. Do you know what, as well? I'd be interested to hear your take on this. So within kind of the parent coaching that you do, um, around neurodivergent parents who are
mm,
parenting neurodivergent children.
mm,
So that's us. Yeah, I'm autistic. My daughter's autistic, ADHD. So that's a battle that we're living through personally. And it's also something through my research that I've spoken to a number of parents who are neurodivergent, and specifically in my PhD research, which is looking at the home educator identity. And I'm working with 7 families, and a number of those families have neurodivergent parents who are home educating their neurodivergent children. So
yeah,
that element of additional challenge of meeting your own needs as well as meeting the needs of your children when both of you have quite complex or extended needs is a real challenge. Is that something that you've come across a lot?
yeah. I mean, to a certain extent, we're living it too, in that my husband is self-identified autistic and ADHD, and so I think, yes, there can be challenges, and there's also real opportunity. Like, so one of the things that's actually been really supportive of our own son's recovery was, my husband will have daily download walks with him.
Okay.
So as part of the kind of the wind down in the evening, because again, neurodiversity, often very tricky getting to sleep, right? Because your brain
Yeah.
just on fire, and so they'll go for a walk, and my son will just download everything that's happened that day, or what's top on his mind, and get it all out basically.
Yeah.
Um, but through that, my husband is then able to share his own experiences and kind of share how he processes the world, and they can see how it's similar and also how it's different. And that has massively supported our son's understanding of his own way of thinking.
Yeah.
Um, and they share coping strategies and techniques, and they explore that together. And so I think, yes, there are undoubtedly challenges in that kind of dynamic, but also there is the opportunity for a real deepening in
Mm.
that relationship and that understanding, because we're saying, like, empathy is one of the key things, right? So actually, if you're experiencing similar challenges, you're not alone.
Yeah.
Like, and you can, it makes it almost a kind of more equal playing field to work together as a
Yeah.
team on resolving what those challenges are, which can be really beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. And do you know what? The whole empathy thing, for years and years, I thought that, I couldn't be autistic because I am so empathetic. I feel everything. And I think that's a real common misconception. Um, and the people in the room, my family, the people around me, I feel everything. So if I walk into a room and people are having a bad day, I
Mm.
feel it. It's there. If one of my family members gets up in the morning and is feeling a bit down, it affects me as
Yeah, yeah.
well. I can feel it. And it's great. It's a great quality to have, to be so empathetic, but also it's really hard, like, to hold everything. And what I remember when I had my autism assessment, and I said that to them, and I was like, "Oh, but I feel everything." Like, they always say that if autistic people, they don't understand other people's feelings and they don't feel it. And I was like, I'm the opposite. Like, I feel everything. And I remember the clinician saying to me, like, it's such a common misconception, because that is like the epitome of some people's experience, is that feeling. So I love that little relationship that you've just described there between your son and your husband, because I think that can be such a special place to share that commonality, and to for your husband to give your child that opportunity to not only model strategies but share them. And I imagine he's probably learning from your son
Oh,
as well.
definitely,
Yeah,
definitely.
so that two-way kind of, we're in it together. And also, can I just say, daily download? I love that phrase.
Yeah.
I think you should trademark that. I think that's brilliant. I think we should all have daily downloads. I'm definitely going to use that for something. But it is true. It's the same kind of premise, isn't it? Of like winding down before bed. It's so important. We are a house, not my fiance, but my daughter and I, we are terrible sleepers. Really, really terrible. Terrible
So
getting off
common.
to sleep, terrible staying asleep. We're early risers. We start the day really, really early, regardless of what time we've been to bed. We can't nap, not very good at napping. It's because of the constant noise in the brain and the constant
Yeah.
go. So any opportunity, and I'm always looking for ways to wind down, and all of these tricks that you see online, try this before bed, try that before bed, and I'm like the opposite. They say, like, don't have the TV on, or don't be looking at your phone and the blue light and everything. I fall asleep to my it's the Big Bang Theory. That's my show.
Right. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
my safe show. So I put that on every single night, and I fall asleep to the Big Bang Theory. And when I finish all of the seasons, I start right back at episode one and I watch it. And it's either the Big Bang Theory or Friends. That's
Right.
that's kind of that. But that, ever since I started doing that, my getting off to sleep has been so much better. And that's
Yeah.
just my way of doing it.
And there's quite a bit of research growing now, isn't there, around that screens are regulating for neurodiverse people. So that makes a lot of sense, that
Right.
actually, it's calming. And I think, I've spoken with my son about it because he spends a lot of time on devices, and because for exactly that reason, it calms his brain. Like when he is engaged in a game on the screen, the rest of his brain quietens down.
Yes.
So it's
So
a
true.
relief, like, and it's really calming for him. And he actually said that, that anything that isn't on the screen feels like a pressure for him at the moment, and um, so, and I think, he's gradually expanding, because we're still, recovering from burnout, and he's doing amazingly, but um, the devices are his safe place.
Yeah.
And so today he did 5 hours in a home ed group. It's only his fifth day trialing it. So he's been doing 2 days a week. And, that was a big deal for him. So he comes home and the first thing he does is like whip straight upstairs, and he's there on his laptop with his headphones on,
Yeah.
listening to an audio book at the same time, because, dual channels. Like, um, and that regulates him, and
Yeah.
that's wind down from having really stretched himself socially, being around a group of people for the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important to acknowledge the benefits of things like that rather than just constantly say how damaging it
A lot
is
of
and the tech.
minimizing
Yeah,
of it.
absolutely. And because I know that when I've put the show on and I'll fall off to sleep and then I wake up and I turn it off and then go to bed. And there are many occasions where I'll turn it off and then 10 minutes later I go, no, I'm not ready. And I have to put it back
Yeah.
on to bring me down again from that. And 9 times out of 10, I turn it on and within 5 minutes, I'm just my eyes closed. I'm not really listening to it. And I've tried putting on like rainforest noises and rain and things like that. Doesn't work. It has to be low level talking, but it has
Yeah.
to be a show that I've seen so many times that I don't need to listen.
Yeah.
But it's just that noise, playing in the background.
And you think about it, it's also that kind of that familiarity probably instills like a felt sense of safety as well,
Yeah,
because you know what's coming,
yeah,
because
it's
it's so
true.
familiar, and like the characters are known, and all of that. So it's not like the noise in the cafe of loads of hubbub and stuff. It's kind of that thing that you already know what's
Hmm.
coming.
Hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's so funny. So let's
Good
talk
choice, by
about
the way. Good choices.
awesome. And it's like the research.
Yeah, exactly.
The research element, it's got to be the Big Bang. It used to be Friends for many, many, many years. My daughter's safe show is Friends as well. And then a few years back, I started with the Big Bang Theory, and now it's like number one for me. I'm like, these are my people. I
For
want
me,
to
it's
be part of them.
the Gilmore Girls. I could
I've
watch
never
that
seen
over and
it.
oh my
Oh,
God.
don't give me another series. I haven't got time. Oh, it's funny though, isn't it? It's finding that calmness in the craziness that is life.
Yeah,
It's-
definitely. Definitely.
So, we spoke earlier about this again terminology around last resort in terms of
Yeah.
home educating for families, and this is something I hear so often, and it's very common at the moment. Parents feeling like home educating is a last resort. It's not their first choice. It's something they're doing out of a need. And you mentioned that this was kind of your experience with
Yeah.
home education. How was that for you?
Ugh. uh, yeah, I mean, not good. Um, I think there are so many emotions that run through you when you're at that point where you realize the school system is damaging your child. Like,
Yeah.
that the situation cannot continue. Like, if you want things to change for your child, like that, we tried working with the school and it was like banging our heads against a brick wall. Unfortunately, they had a behaviour specialist whose view was that if you put adaptations and supports in place, then they would never develop the skills. And I was like, I'm pretty sure that's not how it works. But that was the advice the school were getting. And so because in that situation, we're just parents, anything I suggested fell flat. And it was hugely frustrating because obviously professionally, that was my job, was
Yeah.
to advocate for children, to help schools understand children's needs and put appropriate adaptations in place, right? And yet I couldn't do that for my own child because they just would not listen to me. And so there was this huge sense of failure as a parent, and also guilt because we'd pushed it. We'd been trying to get him in for so long, and so we felt quite responsible for the state that he ended up in, because we'd kind of been doing what we thought was right, which was to get him into school.
Yeah.
That was the wisdom, that was what we were being told was the important thing to do. And And then there was also, for me, a huge amount of resentment, really, that the system had failed him. Like a lot of anger around that, and that I was then having to give up my career, like to support his recovery, and it felt like my life had to kind of basically pause whilst that was happening. And but mainly, I mean, it's just the grief and the worry of seeing your child in that state. You know,
Yeah.
For us at the really low points, like he'd come back from school and he'd hide under his duvet with a tablet, playing those like really repetitive, mindless games, like, and if you tried to interact with him, he would just scream and lash out. He was, having daily violent outbursts. He just was no longer interested in doing anything. And by the time we got back to the UK, he'd recovered a bit whilst we were traveling, but then when we got back to the UK, we were registered as home educated, and I had a view, because we came back in the November, and I had a thought, right, okay, I will get him back into school in September.
Right.
And so that was my goal, really. And so I started finding him groups, because I was like, if I can find him a smaller group, we can build his tolerance to be in a group situation, and that would support his readiness to go back into school. And so we enrolled him in the farm school, and initially he loved it, and then he definitely did not. And he started walking down like busy country roads on his own to try and get back home.
Oh no.
And so we stopped that. And then we found a smaller group that initially kind of worked, but then it didn't. And, and then eventually we had an educational psychology assessment done, because I was kind of preparing myself to have to battle the local authority for an EHCP. And we'd been told that as a home educating family, we weren't entitled to the local authority doing an EP assessment, which I don't actually think is true, but but we would have had a long wait anyway. So we had an ed psych assessment, and she basically said what I'd kind of intuitively been feeling but didn't feel brave enough to embrace, which was that we just needed to back the hell off. And so we did, and that was really excruciating as well, actually, because at that point he was just in his room all day on a device. And I think I managed to negotiate that we would have a conversation 3 times a day, at breakfast, lunch and dinner. Right. At that point, because he couldn't cope with any more. And we just had to kind of gradually expand from there, very slowly. It was excruciating, to be honest, because I think that's the thing, as a parent, you really want your child to kind of be experiencing the world, right? And getting joy from it. And when you see them definitely not experiencing joy, but just finding everything completely overwhelming, that's really difficult to witness. And I think that's the other thing that, those last resort families have, is that if your child is in a state of burnout, then you are probably in a state of burnout as well, right? Because you have been fighting for them, advocating for them, trying to put all these adaptations in place, tearing your hair out, trying to figure out what's going on. And so for me, when we came back to the UK and we were kind of entering this home education community, I'm really fortunate. Frome has an amazing home edding community, and so I was trying to link in with that. But what I noticed was like all these home ed kids seemed so free and so confident and self-assured and, just showing natural curiosity and creativity. And I was like, we're not that because we were in trauma.
Yeah.
And so it felt like this kind of bridging of two worlds because we were no longer part of the school system. We felt quite rejected from the school system, like not wanted, and yet we weren't yet kind of part of that home edding world yet either, because we couldn't access it like yet. And so I had to work quite carefully around that and realize that my need for connection was not his need for connection. And so I reached out to kind of parents and just connected with parents initially. And then I think the real lifeline for us was a woman who had a son who also didn't tolerate groups at all. Said, my son's this age and he's interested in Minecraft and, anybody else like up for a play date. And so they came round one day and it was like they'd been separated at birth. They just, just connected so beautifully. And from there, that friendship just was an absolute godsend. Really supported his recovery. And was just a joy. And actually from there as well, we kind of developed a kind of cooperative, if you like, where we would do swaps. So I would have her son for half a day a week and she'd have our son for half a day a week, so that we each got half a day to ourselves. And that was just amazing because I'd had about 2 years of not having any. And so that was amazing to have that guaranteed time to myself. And that really supported my recovery. So I'm not sure, have I answered the question there?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's really important to acknowledge that process, not just for the child, but for the parent as well. It's not easy being a parent and witnessing your child go through something so traumatic. And this kind of leads me on to my next question around this deschooling process. And I know that that's something that you're very interested in. And we've spoken before about this previously. And not everyone will have heard the term deschooling. So what does that mean? And how does that process, do you think, help with moving through that trauma element?
Yeah, sure. So I think deschooling is it'll be unique to each person, but ultimately it's that peeling back of the layers of conditioning that you and your child have absorbed just through osmosis by living in our society or by attending school. And so it's like an unveiling of those beliefs and assumptions that you've held for so long and are so core to kind of everything and so intrinsic that they've become invisible until actually your situation means they're suddenly smacking you in the face and making things quite intolerable. Like it feels uncomfortable. It ends up with there's a term for it, cognitive dissonance, where like what you believe doesn't match what you feel or behave like.
Okay.
Yeah. So the kind of the rule of thumb that's kind of out there, and it's almost like a folklore. I've tried to find like a research backup for this, but they basically say that for every year of school attendance, a child will need 1 month to de-school themselves, like to kind of unravel from that school process.
Okay.
But actually my experience is it takes a hell of a lot longer, and actually you're probably never finished.
Okay.
Like, and that's not a kind of like, oh God, you're in this process where it's terrible. It's like, it's actually because it is a lifelong learning process. You're constantly relearning and shifting your thoughts around things. And that's actually a really wonderful thing, as well as being uncomfortable sometimes. So I mean, it can be around like really minor things, like, for example, that belief that children should have their hair cut regularly, right? So where does that actually come from? Actually, it's a lot of it is like the school expectation that boys will have short hair, like, and it'll be tidy and things,
Okay.
But actually, if you're home educating and your child hates haircuts, do they need a haircut? Like, do they really? Like, what purpose is it actually serving apart from meeting an expectation that's actually held out there? If it's okay in your family,
Yeah.
like, what's the issue? So it can be like really, small things like that, but it can also be really fundamental things about like what is learning.
Yeah.
So for me, there was this big thing in my head that if my son had learned something, he'd be able to write it down. Like, that evidence had to be written down. Like, that was the proof that he had learned something. And I kind of, and writing for him was actually his real area of struggle. Like, he's got dysgraphia, so actually I was basically, but he's on the 98th, 99th percentile in some areas, so he's got these amazing skills, but I was making him try and demonstrate it using the area of weakness, like, and which understandably he found quite frustrating. And so I had to kind of say to myself, why is this important to me? And I realized it's because at school you have to write it down. But why do you have to write it down? To prove to the teacher that you know what you're talking about. But actually, children can write reams and not understand what they're actually writing about.
True. Yeah.
Or be able to apply that to the real world or their situation.
Mm.
And so I had to really unravel that. And then I just went, yeah, no, he can demonstrate his learning by having a conversation, by, making something, by drawing something, whatever way, by applying that learning to a situation. So that's kind of like some examples of that deschooling process, really.
So the deschooling isn't for the child necessarily, but for the parent as well.
Yeah. I would say most of the deschooling that's happened in our family is in me. Like, I think my son already knew that like school was not right for him and it was not the right approach, and so he had already actively rejected it, right? But I had to really unravel and unpick some of my assumptions and beliefs about especially because not only had I started school at 4 and kind of but I'd then been working in education. So basically, I'd been in the education system for, at that point, 39 of my 43 years. So I had a lot to unpack.
You're probably still doing it. Yeah.
I am still doing it. Yeah. But what's really interesting is it's kind of like this kind of spiral process. I kind of imagine it like a sort of snail shell type thing where the thing that feels massive to unpack and unpick and get over and process will crop up again somewhere else, but it will feel less strong. And each time you re-experience it in a different format, it will be that bit weaker. The voice that's thundering in your head will kind of start getting quieter and quieter until it's a whisper. and you get to say, no, that's an old voice. Like, that's not mine anymore. And that process is hugely liberating, but also uncomfortable.
Yeah. You have to go through the discomfort to get to that liberation, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Gosh, there's just so much, isn't there? We can't finish without talking about the book that you're writing. Tell us more about this book.
Well, I mean, it's essentially about that journey, really. And I've started writing it. I'm in very early stages at the moment, but I really, when we entered home education for that second time, and we were in that kind of difficult situation, the home education sort of information was all about, you're making this amazing choice, and like, that you've decided that this is the right thing to do for your family. And I was like, that is not where I'm at. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm doing this through gritted teeth because the system has failed us, kind of thing. And and for me, that that emotional processing of all of that was hugely needed before I could fully embrace home education and it become like a really joyful experience. And so the book is really sharing that journey and the challenges that I experienced during it, and trying to share some of the learning that I gained through that process in the hope that actually that will help other parents on their journey to not feel alone, and or that they're going crazy, or that they're a terrible person for feeling that way about having to do this or anything like that. It's just trying to support that journey, really.
Brilliant. I think it sounds fantastic, and you definitely have to keep us updated on when it's out there so that people can read it. As a parent who's been through that cycle of having to support your child through burnout and that kind of traumatic moment of your lives, if you got any advice for anyone listening who may be experiencing that at the moment?
Listen to them.
Yeah.
Like, really deeply listen, in a way, and I'm not saying that you're not listening already, but like in a way of like, don't see them not wanting to go to school as poor behavior or defiance or stubbornness. See it as their communication of their capacity to cope. Because that behavior might be the only way that they can say it, because they don't even know what's happening for them and they can't communicate it, they can't express it verbally. And so it's that get calm, get curious, and start exploring what it is that is making school feel intolerable for them. And with the with the burnout part of it, one of the models that I kind of really held in mind through our journey was it's called comfort, stretch, panic.
Okay.
So, and I've tried to find where it originally came from, and there's disputes about who came up with it. So I'm not going to say anybody at the moment. Like, but if you imagine you've got your comfort zone in the middle, and then you've got your stretch zone as a circle around that, and then you've got your panic zone beyond that. So you've got those three circles. And in burnout, the child's comfort zone will have shrunk right down. What they can tolerate, what feels safe to them, will be really, really small and specific. And their stretch zone will be like one of those really taut elastic bands, like like around the edge, be really thin, like that's what they can stretch into. And with stretch, I mean that it feels like a challenge, but it feels within your capabilities to deal with it. that's going to feel really small as well. And then the rest of it will be panic and overwhelm.
Yeah.
Too loud, too many, kind of, um, and so again, it's around that kind of getting curious as to what's in that comfort zone right now and sticking to the comfort zone and making it as low demand as possible and being really patient. And that is really hard. Really hard. Till they can stretch themselves. And it'll be baby steps. And then it's, kind of gradually finding those opportunities where you're following their stretch and you can find things that are just that little bit more for them. And that's what I think.
I think that's the key, isn't it? For what I'm getting from you is time. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's a process. It's something that everybody needs to slow down and be present within as it goes.
And that is one of the challenges as well in terms of schools being able to adequately adjust for kids in burnout, because actually they're restricted as to how long they can have a child on a reduced timetable. And that's for very legitimate reasons. They're trying to stop schools from off-rolling kids, right? But it means that I think they can only do that for 6 weeks. And then they have to apply for more to the local authority to do 12.
Right.
But, 12 weeks, that's 3 months to recover from massive burnout. That's not realistic. So that kind of needs to be addressed, really, in order to allow schools to have the flexibility to support these situations.
Yeah. Is there any kind of small things that you would say that schools could be doing to better support children that are neurodivergent or children that are experiencing trauma?
For me, one of the key things that is unhelpful in the burnout situation for neurodiverse students is the school attendance agenda and how vicious that has become.
Yeah.
And because that actually creates a whole extra layer of blame and shame, and that is really unhelpful to the recovery process. And so I think, if schools can be mindful in how they are applying their school attendance policies, that would be hugely helpful to not only the students but also the parents, because the parents get hugely stressed as well, and then they're not in a position to support their child. And actually you really need them to be in a position to support their child. So I think, and I've actually just been reading the Working Together School Attendance Guidance. And in that, it specifically says that, if school attendance is an issue because of SEN, mental health needs, or a medical issue, then really there needs to be additional support put in place first.
Yeah.
But that part of the guidance does not seem to be happening.
Yeah.
Instead, it's kind of, letter sent home, oh, well, the attendance is at 83 and it needs to be this, and you need to start doing this. And somehow that stage of it is getting missed.
Yeah.
But again, due to capacity.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such a complex situation, isn't it? It's not just one thing. It's like what we were saying earlier about COVID and everything. There's not just one thing. There are lots of changes that need to be made by lots of different groups of people to make these things work. So it's not an overnight fix, but, there are little things that we could all be doing better, I think. So it's wonderful to hear from you the different bits of advice and experience, the lived experience that you've had as well, is really impactful in terms of demonstrating A, what needs to be done, and B, what can be done realistically. I think is really, really key. So as we finish up, I'd like to give you the final word and leave the listeners with something hopeful. So for parents who might be feeling like they're struggling at the moment, perhaps feeling like home education or a change in their education is their last resort, have you got like an empowering message or a message of support that you could share?
Yeah, so I think it's that it feels like a last resort now, but actually it can be the start of your liberation. Most people don't get that shove that helps them step out of the hamster wheel. They just keep running and like feeling like that going faster is better. But this is a bit like the Matrix. You've just taken the red pill. Basically, you're one step closer to your truth and your child's truth. Yeah.
Veronica, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your story and your words of wisdom from your experience. It's been absolutely fascinating and empowering to hear how we can try and make these experiences better for our children who are struggling. So thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Thank you. It's been really lovely.
Thank you.